Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for coming along to this talk. My name is Alex Hansen. I'm a games developer from the north of England, and I'm going to be talking about addressing play inequality. And in the nature of playfulness, I've wired up this weird slide changer, which is a lamp attached to me. So yeah, we'll see how we get on with that. So a little bit about my background. I'm an educator, experimental games designer, and I'm a maker. So like maybe kind of producing things with like laser cutters, 3D printers, things like that. And I'm from up north. And the big thing that I care about an immense amount is approachable design. And that differs from accessible design in that like even before people reach that point of engagement, you lose so many people because of the ways that we design technology and play that alienates a lot of people. First thing I want to lead with is that like a lot of talks, particularly around tech, people present things as kind of absolutist advice, or like me being kind of the arbiter of all knowledge. I've done I've been in the industry for 10 years, been doing work in kind of various groups over the last two. I'm just figuring this out. Take my advice with a pinch of salt. And I'm not immune to bad takes. So a little bit about kind of my relationship with grip games whilst growing up. Spent a lot of time in my youth playing games. As part of that, had like some creative outlets where I was like using tools that you could make your own games experiences with. That gave me like an immense amount of fulfillment as a kid. And one of the things that came up at the time from my parents was like spending too much time on games, and that was like extended kind of in the national conversation around like kids with square eyes and violence in video games. And like for me, that was such a disconnect from the fulfillment and purpose that games gave me. And it's one of these things that like, as you get a bit older, you have to kind of question whether this is just that bias coming in. But like for me, having worked in games for 10 years and seen how these systems have changed, like that relationship has changed with the youth in particular, where things are far more extractive. The scale of kind of industrial production has like increased and scaled up, and I'm not convinced anymore, or like my kind of confidence in games being a force for good has been questioned based on the state of the industry and like where things are at. And I have to make that distinction. Like I love playing games, giving people their first experiences of games, and showing people how to express through games. Like I live for that. So this isn't a rejection of games in itself, it's the kind of extractive industry that is causing play inequality. And in terms of like pulling back to games as a medium, it kind of struggles in kind of modern culture to kind of be recognized as like art or to be taken seriously by people and a lot of institutions. And a lot of people look at that and they're like, these kind of older institutions are out of touch, they don't quite understand what games are. But I think one of the reasons that there's such a disconnect is because the primary thing that games is focused around and the industry is focused around is immersion as a means of escapism. So how can you design your technology to withdraw from the world? And like, I'll be clear, like, I think that's a perfectly valid pursuit. There are people who are introverted or struggle with social situations that thrive in these spaces. And myself included, like when I've had difficult times in my life, games have provided a really good outlet for that. But because it is the primary focus of that, the impact and footprint on culture of games has been extremely limited. And games do have a culture about them, but they are like heavily concentrated in commodified spaces. So the best parallel would be something like a shopping center. Like you could in theory get cultures within those spaces, but there is always that underlying pressure to consume and to buy things. And previously you had things like arcades or like people sitting down and playing games together communally, but like slowly over time things have become much more individualistic and more isolated. And what's frustrating in my point is that like the technology has never been more capable of instigating communal play, as I'll get to in a bit. Yet we're just shifting towards isolation. And the truth is like the majority of the population have like just a completely disconnected from games, and it doesn't feel like it because like the industry is such a prominent. It's like so prominent in kind of society. People talk about it being bigger than film and music, but in reality, like even if games is making more money than film, film is more accessible to people, and it's much more present in culture than games are. And that's something that we have to fix. And like, I believe this is the case because play isn't distributed or experienced equally across society. And this boils down to the fact that video games didn't develop as an art form, it developed as an industry, and an extractive one at that. And when we think of games, it's quite abstracted, it's digital, you almost think of it, it's almost kind of cleaner because it's not like a kind of traditional industry, but like it is an extractive industry in the same way that something like, something where you're mining something from the ground. Like there is labor and finance and tech that is poured into this industry to extract time and money from the audience. And as time has gone on, those methods of extraction have become more and more extreme, and you've seen that reflected in the pushback from players. So there's things like live services, for example, that have kind of tried to monopolize people's time, or loot boxes that integrate mechanics that risk people getting addicted to gambling or making them spend ridiculous amounts of money on skins. It's just like when we pull back to like the scale of like industrial waste that comes from that process, there's like it's just obscenely wasteful. So in the last few years, for example, we've seen multi-million-dollar projects that I think it's, Concord's a great example of a game where I think it was 6 years development, something like that, and like a couple of $100 million that went into it, and it got shuttered and closed down after 2 weeks. And like the amount of good that money could have done for society and could have done in other places, or even just on other games within the industry, like it's just such a waste. And there's a pressure on the publisher side of things where like if your game like kind of padding out your game with more content to try and like capitalize and monopolize on people's time, like that is both disrespectful of developers' time and it's also disrespectful of players' time. And the other one to mention around loot boxes, which people don't talk about as much, is like the size of games have like increased significantly in the last decade or so, and like that isn't necessarily because of the amount of content that people are getting. It's in a lot of cases skins, so it's costumes and accessories that massively bloat the scale of games, which in turn fills hard drives up. It wastes energy, so like downloading games, you're dealing with hundreds of gigabytes at this point, which again, like most people will not interact with most of that content. So it's just a hugely wasteful industry. And I believe that like this scale of extraction and the scale of investment going into this industry creates a vacuum of play in society. And like in the last couple of decades, like the kind of idea of play has almost been captured by the industry, and like that's where you go to play. But like play is this fundamental thing that like all people and all all animals as well feel on like a fundamental level, and that's like a part of like our interactions with each other, and it's like a shared experience for expression and for building trust with one another. And we are seeing across society an absence of play at all levels and all generations, and we need to address it. So just to give some examples, so the elderly are the group that I care passionately about because they are just completely uncatered for by not only the games industry but just generally, particularly people in care homes. They're just left without stimulation or engagement. The bit that really frustrates me about the elderly is that we knew 20 years ago that we could engage the elderly via Wii Sports, which was an incredibly successful game, cut through to millions of people, created intergenerational engagement, and yeah, I could do a whole talk just talking about how successful that was. And 20 years on, people are still playing Wii Sports in care homes, but we've not built any. Like there was a lady 2 years ago that won the Wii Bowling Championship, who was 95, and there was like literally hundreds of people in the crowd cheering her on, and it's like we just didn't do anything with that piece of information. In terms of like installations and kind of interactive stuff in public spaces, the primary ones are gambling machines, and the fact that they've they're the only present interactive play in public spaces is a real trouble, because inevitably there is that element of addiction that we don't address. And particularly again with older audiences, are quite targeted for it. And there's this conversation around food deserts that exists, where the lack of places with nourishing food really impacts communities and neighbourhoods, and the same exists for play. In the UK, over the last decade, we've seen hundreds of playgrounds shut and being sold off by councils. And yeah, it's just this decline of play in society, which is just going to keep getting worse. And there's been debates and discussions recently about how do we address this? Kids are spending too much time on the screens, the same conversations that we were having when I was a kid. And the crucial question is if you're gonna force kids off their phones and send them outside, where are they gonna go? The UK subsidises the games industry. It provides tax incentives, grants, all this stuff. Millions and millions of pounds. If you're telling people, if you're subsidising this industry, which is privatised, digital, and encouraging people to go to those spaces while slashing funding for public spaces, where are you telling kids to spend their time? And this is exacerbated with kids with disabilities. So there's still not one playground in the UK that accommodates the needs of neurodivergent children or kids with disabilities. And the frustrating thing is that there are so many wonders of the games industry in terms of immersion and technology that we just don't integrate into public spaces. And sensory technology is a great example. And this doesn't seem like a fair fight, but and this may be slightly controversial here, but in my opinion, the good news is that the industry has faltered. There was a huge there is an ongoing collapse of the games industry that is purely down to greed, or very heavily down to greed. There's people that have elaborated on this plenty, but the long and short of it was during lockdown, the industry saw this huge swell of interest of people looking for escapism and immersion at a time that they wanted to forget what was happening in the world. And the industry capitalized on that. They massively scaled up production. They took on tons of investment, and you can see from these scales they were predicting astronomical growth, and ultimately they were betting on people not going outside and then maintaining that stranglehold on people's attention, and they were wrong. And that's it's very cathartic to see that they were wrong, and unfortunately the outcome of that has been this multi-year crash that has seen the industry in just a terrible state. And studios continue to be shut down, publishers are cancelling projects, events are going bust, and even investors are starting to kind of pull money out of games. and there's this like stench of death. Like even in the last week, like Microsoft laid off 4,000 employees, and it's like, people are talking about survive till 25, like 2025, and it's like, it keeps getting worse, and it's like, what's gonna happen? And like, even beyond this current crash, the industry is being crushed by the standards that it's built for itself. So, over its lifespan, we've gone from like, games that you play in a couple of minutes, you go to an arcade, you insert your coin, you play for like 5 minutes, you leave. We're now at a point, it's impossible to do a talk about these intersections without mentioning GTA. It seems a part and parcel thing to do, but if we contrast that with the upcoming Grand Theft Auto, that game has like pitched itself as having a 400-hour play experience, which is like just an absurd length of time, and like one that has taken them a decade so far to finish. And like the question is from here, like, where do they go next? Like, are they doing a 500, 600, 700-hour experience? Like, and like the big question is how extractive are their methods going to have to be to make these investments back? And how is the industry going to respond to that? And so like, this trajectory is just like unsustainable. And like, again, I'm not pretending that this is like the alternative. There's lots of people kind of making other suggestions out here. This is one alternative that I think may be an approach for going forwards, which is that we have these like industries focusing on building these 100-hour experiences for an audience that already has far too many games. Like, it's a common refrain with things like Steam libraries where people have like hundreds of games that they're not even bothered to play. And we're in this position where there are still billions of people that go their entire lives without playing video games. And like, even like a 100-second experience of play seems such an easier target to engage than people who are, have a surplus, who are fulfilled. And the thing that's exciting is that these people who are without, have much lower expectations of what games should be. And this is only going to keep getting worse. I mentioned the elderly earlier. One of the reasons that I care about this so much is that the games industry is perceived as an audience for the young, but where the average age of gamer is now 35, that is only going to keep getting older. In the next 20 years, in the UK, I think over 65s are going to outnumber under 16s. So we're going to have to accommodate these audiences, or people who've grown up with games are going to be forced out and not accommodated for. So like, this is only going to keep getting worse. But we can do this. We can overcome this if we like reject the standards of the industry and build things for this playless majority. So I want to talk about Plug and Play. This was a project that I worked on last year with my colleague David Hayward, the National Video Game Museum, and Rotherham Council. And this was a nature-themed games trail, which was intended to kind of bring the community together with installations in various playful locations around town. And the context for this as well was that like a couple of months earlier there was the kind of summer riots that happened, and these things were unrelated, but like as part of designing this festival rather than just building it for gamers, who were obviously welcome to kind of attend and engage with it, we wanted to build stuff that would engage the widest public possible, to bring the community together to engage in play in the aftermath of that. And with that we rejected the standards of the industry and focused on play in all forms, and these were integrated in community spaces, so we had things like the town square, Rotherham Minster, all sorts of I think one of the council buildings, so we integrate it into people's daily lives and routines where they could just discover it organically. And in particular, this element of nature we kind of lent into as like a commonly shared value, like you know, we've got the River Don that runs through Rotherham, and then there was like the like Rotherham was one of the first places in the country to do like wilding of like what they're called, like kind of letting kind of things overgrow and kind of encouraging wildflowers to grow. So yeah, just kind of really leaning into that interest around like care for the environment. And yeah, like as I mentioned before, we had 3 months to build this project, and we had to get 8 installations done. So with that, we had, like, it was almost a necessity to reject industry standards, because like I can build my own games, but like it wasn't going to work in 3 months. So just to run you through some of the games that we built. So like this one was called Frog Tipping, kind of a play on the word fly tipping. So it's like a mischievous frogs like dumped litter in the river, and the game is you know, magnetic fishing, which is a game that like a lot of people are familiar with, where you've got a little fishing rod and you're kind of pulling fish out of a little pond of animals. We instead made it, you were collecting litter from the local river. We tested this at local schools and got local engagement. The reason that we actually had these gym mats in the church that we hosted it in was because we built that goodwill with the primary schools. And yeah, they absolutely loved playing the game, got tons of feedback from them. What I loved about this game was that I think it only cost about £300 to build. I have access to the local hack space, so all of these elements were like laser cut wood, handcrafted, and like these are actually, oh whoops, these ropes here are made out of like skipping ropes cut in half, so like just all ordinary items that people can just get a hold of. And what I found particularly compelling about this game, and a lot of the other games in the setup, is that because it was purely analog and didn't have any digital moving parts, the rules were much more malleable. People could make whatever rules or adaptations they made. From what I can remember, we had like a bunch of different coloured rods that were kind of scattered along the pews. There was one group of kids that came along, and our intention when we designed it was for kids to be able to pick a team and then collect the litter of that colour in the river, but immediately they came in and like started switching the rods that they were holding to match the colours of litter that we were collecting. So we just saw this and actively encouraged people to experiment and play with the rules. And yeah, we had this situation where like we had kids of different faiths queuing through a church to like collect litter together and having fun. And it was just like, it was just great. It was really good. And this game was like arguably like one of the sleeper hits of the show. People absolutely loved it. And yeah, we were dead chuffed with how it went. This next one is one called Radiant Vines. I've got the kind of controller for this here. The premise of this game is we wanted to build something that was approachable. I think I mentioned before that approachable design is this thing that I kind of care about an immense amount. One of the biggest barriers to people interacting with games is the controllers that we use to engage with them. And yeah, a watering can is an object that a lot of people are very familiar with. I'm assuming it hasn't gone to sleep, which it might have done. Give me 1 second. I get some very unusual looks on the underground carrying this, but when you tip this thing over, as you would use it as an object, it illuminates the nozzle of the watering can. And that was just a really good way at the start of the trail to get people feeling confident about engaging with the rest of the games on the trail. It set the expectation of what the rest of the trail was going to be, because like, you know, it's a very common ritual for people to be able to water plants. And you know, arguably, how much of a game it actually is like, you know, some people would question it, but it was an experience that all ages engaged with, and people who conventionally wouldn't interact with games. And yeah, like it was a lot more technically complex to build, but as I'll go into in a second, like this has since then being used as a framework to engage people with dementia, which is kind of the current target of what I'm looking at doing going forwards. And then, yeah, the other project I want to mention, which again, like, there were digital games that were, it emphasizes part of this festival. One thing we really wanted to be central to the delivery of this was local creative expression. We didn't want it to just be this thing where we kind of came in with this thing, exhibited some stuff, and then left. So like this was a games project done by Jim Thompson called Tales in Terrain, and this was basically a big wall of kind of poster paper, and people can kind of come up and select some of these like different stamps, and then kind of fill out just a couple of stamps on this big wall that was like a representation of the local town, and people could kind of add their own little labels to indicate what they were kind of interested in, or kind of little secrets about the town. And all in all, we had this huge engagement from people over the 3 days. I think we had about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And yeah, everyone had a really nice time. We didn't have any kind of like, it was a peaceful event. In the kind of like reviews we had afterwards, or kind of reports, like it was allegedly like a 97% satisfaction rating, which like, very happy with that. And we saw this engagement in play and expression by local residents. And like, in that 3-month time span, working with kind of artists and contractors, I think we built 4.5 of the games that were exhibited. We did that in 3 months, which was admittedly 4 or 6 months would have been nice, but we did it. And yeah, in that time since, like we got to keep the technology that we've developed, and like we've been finding applications locally for it to be used. So in the example of Radiant Vines, I'm interested in this in the area of like engaging care homes, and like the fact that so much of immersive tech in care homes, because of the scarcity of available, people charge exorbitant costs for sensory rooms in care homes, and trying to provide low-cost, tactile, immersive experiences that like reflect common interests and memories is just, it's quite compelling as like as a design project after a decade of just building kind of games for conventional platforms. And so far, it's been some of the most fulfilling work that I've done in my career. And like, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water, but I'll give you a rundown of what I am proposing. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but oh well. So, I believe that we have to engage this playless majority. It's like almost like a necessity at this point. In my opinion, I think play is almost this, it's almost like a utility. It's something that, like water or food, that we should value as an essential good and an essential need. I will preface, I think the games industry should continue to exist as a thing that caters and engages people. I think just the balance is way off in terms of how much we value the industry versus communal and public play. I believe play as a kind of abstract thing, or like a kind of like this commodity or this public good I was talking about, we need to kind of just de-industrialize it and break this expectation that for kids in particular, like that you have to wait till you grow up to be games designers and to create play. Like, you know, it's more possible than ever to kind of build experiences for yourselves and for the places that you live. And I'm interested in seeing if many of these like incentives, things like the UK Games Fund or Transfuser or video game tax relief, or these various funds, or the immersive arts grants, if like some of that can be just a portion of that be assigned to engage public spaces, I feel like that's something that we could advocate for, that would align with an organisation that I've recently started getting kind of in contact with, is Play England. They're an organisation that is like currently putting pressure and kind of trying to advocate for statutory play requirements. So similar to how you have like football grounds, in basketball courts, in villages. The same for kind of places that foster and nurture play. And yeah, I genuinely believe that this is achievable and that this could like have a real impact on society. And I think this can't be industry-led, like it could be, but I think given the models that we have right now, the numbers just won't work. Like, you know, the art that was done, like the kind of the installation that was done for plug-in and play, we only had one project that was done by an industry contractor, and they did an amazing job, and they deserved the money that they got, but it made up a fifth of the budget for just one installation, and it was, yeah, it was more conventional and less communal than the other experiences. Again, brilliant project, but just like the scale of games where you're building projects for years and costing millions versus the scales that I'm currently working at where you're building things in weeks or months and costing hundreds or thousands of pounds is like just a very different scale. And in particular, I believe that the more technology and wealth that goes into these things, the less connected to culture and communities they become, and they're less malleable and reactive. And yeah, like if we can bring these playful tools and expressions and experiences to communities and give them a degree of ownership and pride and reflection and expression in play, I just think that could really become like a point of public and community kind of pride and utility. And like the thing that I really dream of and like imagine is like if we took so much of the energy of the kids today, again, it is perfectly valid and should be celebrated expression of kids in things like Roblox, Minecraft, these tools that are incredible for expression, but ultimately for privatized, commodified digital spaces. And if we gave them the agency and tools to express themselves in public spaces and in their neighborhoods, what kind of expression could be achieved? Like, as an example, the game in the background here, Runnabees, we designed in collaboration with local kids and they like were so enthusiastic to give their input and kind of design suggestions on how to build stuff. And compared to like the conventional way that we interact with technology in games now, where it's people in their homes, like individually interacting with stuff, like finding ways to address play inequality in society, find places in our cities where that exists. Places like children's hospitals or care homes or community centres, and like injecting and fostering play in those spaces, and having that serve local interests rather than trying to capture a mass market. And when we kind of, again, like play, not only is this thing that nourishes and enriches, I think politically, we live in very, very polarized times, and play is this tool that you can use to bring people together in a way that they usually would be hostile to. So if I give like an example of, let's say you have two very polarized communities, you put on a community night where it's like, hello, two groups, let's come together and talk about stuff. You will either have like very limited kind of engagement from said groups, or like people will come in with the hackles raised. If you present something as, let's say, like what we did with Plug and Play, where it's just, again, we didn't like, basically if you provide like a community night where it's, carnival games or, football. Football's a good example where like, you have communities that otherwise wouldn't interact with each other doing five-a-side, and there might be like political, racial, class, all sorts of disagreements between those groups, but for that short period of time, they play games together, and that kind of stuff is obviously still something that needs addressing, but like it's a place where trust can be exchanged, and you can, play's like a really good place to test and experiment with different scenarios that can kind of build trust between people. And yeah, I think like if we invest and create more places in society for social contact and for this like exchanging of trust in like building of trust, hopefully we'll see more cohesion and more trust in society. Because like trust is one of those things that like people constantly bring up as something that they feel we have less of these days. So in terms of where to start, so I think if it's not clear from what I've been saying, we should ditch industrial tools to do this. So, you know, it is possible to use things like Unity or Unreal or these kind of like industry-grade tools, but ultimately, if we're wanting to do this stuff at small scales and address things locally, sticking to tools that are democratized, commonly used by children, and playful, and yeah, like don't have any kind of commercial price tags connected to them. And yeah, there's loads of stuff out there. Like Scratch is one that's been taught like in so many different schools across the UK and across the world. And yeah, like it's not going to be to the standards of the games industry, but you can still build like creative experiences that appeal to people. Another one that's kind of an outlier here is something like PowerPoint, so like a slide-based presentation. If I just kind of go back a couple of slides, like this installation here, you can't quite see it, but the format for it was displayed on a kind of department board style flipboard. And it was a very complex piece of technology that we ran this game on. And in contingency for the game, and when we ran it in schools, we built a version that ran on PowerPoint so that we could test it in that setting, displaying, for context of how the game works, you're creating mosaics of flowers using vulcan boards. So you could create those mosaics in PowerPoint and it would work just the same as a game. And whoops, I've just skipped a lot of the presentation. I don't know what's happening here. Maybe I will disconnect this just for now. Yes, okay, cool. So yeah, sticking to simple tools and focusing that on like having that as a targeting point of like don't go too high in scope, aim for like a 100-second experience or even a 30-second experience. You don't need to overdo it. You can always add more complexity. One of the things that kept coming up when we were doing plug and play was like realizing that human-to-human interaction could fill so many blanks in for technology that's like adds more moving parts than necessary. Yeah, and honestly, it can sometimes become more fun for having that human-to-human interaction. And yeah, like seek out local communities in your area, find places that, you know, whether it's activism, whether it's, you know, places that you know people aren't getting enough support, and engage them with play. And the thing that I love doing in my career, like I've had some like commercial success over my career, I've had like won awards, things like that, but like the thing that has mattered more to me than anything else is giving people their first experiences of games. And like that, nothing comes close to it. It's such a satisfying thing. And yeah, like as I mentioned before, ditch conventional inputs. So many people are alienated by the hostile design of conventional controllers, and if you don't have to use technology, don't bother. I think of tech like salt. You need substance to add it to, and you know, if you try and make an experience just out of salt, it's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. And yeah, like all in all, ask the question of like, think of someone in your life and how can you reach that one new person with the games that you design. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for your patience, and yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, go. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
No, should I start?
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go.